And now, the best 60-ish seconds of your week.
Kash Patel gets confirmed, and now virtually every one of the Trump nominees has been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. You know, there was all this chatter in the media. They were having this little game that they played about who would be the first to go, who was going to fall by the wayside, who wouldn't get confirmed. They've run the table. And you've got to give John Thune and the Senate leadership a lot of credit, but the American people ultimately are the real winners here, because now President Trump has the ability to structurally do all that he has undertaken so quickly, even without every cabinet position being confirmed. You know, what they've done in the first few weeks of this administration truly is amazing. And I want to just depart from the usual path of politics for a moment this week to talk about a murder case. Ellen Greenberg, a beautiful young woman, was murdered 14 years ago in Philadelphia. Now, to be very candid, there are a lot of murders in Philadelphia, so that may not be all that startling, but this was interesting because she was stabbed more than 20 times, including in the back, and one report said post-mortem, meaning that she was stabbed after she had actually passed away. So the original ruling of a homicide, which made perfect sense, being overturned to say it was a suicide made no sense. How does somebody stab themselves 20 times, including in the back, and particularly once at least after they were dead? And how does it then become a suicide? So the plot thickens really, really quickly, because ultimately the case ends up in the office of Josh Shapiro, now the governor of Pennsylvania. And he'd like nothing more than to ever hear any word about this case again, because just a couple of weeks ago, the medical examiner who said it was a suicide recanted his testimony and said he no longer believes it was a suicide. He believes it was a cold-blooded murder. So now the case is going to get reopened and reinvestigated. And a lot of questions are going to be asked about Josh Shapiro and his handling of the case when it was in the Office of Attorney General. The family of the victim says that he sat on it, that he slow-walked it. And a private investigator, a former Pennsylvania state trooper, and a highly regarded private investigator rather, says that it was one of the worst cases he had ever seen. And he said, "I don't like lying politicians." You can take that for whatever you want it to mean. I think it's pretty clear. But now the case is reopened, and we're going to see a lot of things. One of the things that was very interesting about this case was that in the midst of the campaign for governor, a private journalist published a story that said that Josh Shapiro had financially gotten financial contributions from the family of the deceased boyfriend, who I don't want to say is a target of an investigation, but certainly is somebody that's being talked about as a potential target. And the fact that Shapiro had taken campaign contributions from his family raised some serious questions. Shapiro did the typical Josh Shapiro. He said, "Oh, no, there's no conflict of interest here, but there may be the appearance of a conflict of interest," and so he kicked it back down the line. It was a classic Josh Shapiro political move, but as Tom Brennan, the investigator on this case, says, we don't like lying politicians. So stay tuned. There's a lot more to be heard on this case, and I will predict this: it does not end well for Josh Shapiro. And in international politics this week, in my native Brazil, they attempted or are moving forward with a prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro, the former president. And if it sounds eerily similar to some of the things we've heard about here in the U.S., well, gee, it really is. There are so many parallels between what they're attempting to do to Jair Bolsonaro and what they did here in the U.S. to Donald Trump. All of this turns on the last presidential election, the closest presidential election in Brazilian history, which quite bluntly was stolen from Jair Bolsonaro by a guy that they let out of prison in order to run, a communist who has run the country into the ground. But he has a really, really powerful ally, and Alejandro de Moraes, the head of the elections court in Brazil. We don't have that in the U.S., and I think a lot of Americans would have a hard time understanding how powerful these rogue judges can be in Brazil. Why? Because unlike in the United States, they have their own police force. Think about that. They have the federal police at their command. So they can do pretty much as they want, and they go unchecked. A real problem for a constitutional republic that is modeled after the United States of America. So what happens immediately after this indictment comes down? Donald Trump's media company comes to, I won't say the rescue, but comes to the fore with a lawsuit against Alejandro de Moraes for trampling on free speech rights. And there's no question that they have trampled all over free speech rights. Anytime you say anything critical of either the Lula government or of Moraes himself, you're either going to get indicted or have all sorts of trouble. We can't even comprehend that here. But we can pray for justice to be done in Brazil. We can pray for Jair Bolsonaro. And we can be thankful that Donald Trump's team has led the way on this. The other guy, by the way, that Moraes trampled all over the rights of, including taking his money, was a man by the name of Elon Musk. You may have heard of him. And it's going to be very interesting to see what Musk does. Stay tuned. And for now, that is the best 60-ish seconds of your week.